The more I got to know the Briarwoods, the more nightmarish I realised they were. The same servants still run the halls, but they aren't living. They're walking vessels of undeath. Their flesh slowly tearing away.
Well, hello! Thank you for stumbling across my humble internet video, and for taking the bravest step of all, clicking on it. I'm sure since this is my first video in this subject area, and it's a disgrace that it's taken me this long to get around to it, for many of you this will be your first time here. If you like what you're about to see, or maybe just a bit trigger happy, hitting that subscribe button is always appreciated, and of course a comment and a like if you're feeling very generous. I like to dabble in a little media analysis in a somewhat coherent fashion, and I'm also a huge fan of Critical Role and Dungeons & Dragons generally, so naturally I felt it was high time to combine the two, especially with the Vox Machina animated series finally in our sweaty, needy hands. In this particular deep dive, we're going to be looking at the Briarwood/Whitestone arc of Campaign 1, a story arc that runs from episode 23 to episode 35, that is foreshadowed a few times in prior storylines for this adventuring party, and certainly comes into play a few times after the main story arc is finished. I'll also be quite honest from the get-go. I got into watching Critical Role with Campaign 2. I did try and start with Campaign 1, however technical difficulties with those early streams were a little off-putting for me as a new viewer trying to get to know the format and the cast. Instead I jumped ahead to Campaign 2, watched along with all the highs and lows of the Mighty Nine, the party we followed in Campaign 2, and cried and laughed more times than I will ever be able to count. With the confirmation of the Vox Machina animated series and the impending premiere date, I decided it was finally time to give Campaign 1 another chance, now far more familiar with the cast, which helped me to get through those earlier episodes as the technical side of the production gradually improved over time. However, something I find particularly interesting about the story arc I'm about to talk about is that even during Campaign 2, I would always manage to stumble across this fan favourite, almost idolised story arc. The Briarwood arc would crop up in fan discussions online, I'd see art and videos inspired purely by this storyline. Thankfully I was pretty quick at uncanny dodging my way around spoilers, and didn't know enough about Campaign 1 to piece together potentially dramatic reveals. When it was confirmed that Vox Machina Animated would be covering this arc in some detail, the fan reaction and hype within the Critical Role/Critter community was palpable. So naturally when I finally reached this arc in my Campaign 1 watch through, I felt that excitement too. But also a little trepidation. What if the storyline wasn't everything it was stacked up to be? Could it be that because this arc has been so cherished by the fandom for so long that it didn't actually meet its own hype? I was about to find out, slowly, over the course of several hours. My expectations going into this section are that you have seen this arc already, maybe you've watched it a few times, or maybe you live your life on the edge and want this entire story arc spoiled by me. Whatever it may be, this is your last warning for major spoilers. Well, now that we've settled that, it's time to break down what in fresh hell the Briarwood arc is. So, as previously mentioned, the Briarwood arc covers the storyline the adventuring party of Vox Machina journey on from episodes 23 to 35 of Campaign 1. I say journey on, but you might as well insert severely traumatized by in there. Firstly, it would be quite helpful to look at our key players in this arc, our key characters as it were. We're going to need a chart. Let's start with our valiant mismatch of adventurers, Vox Machina, starting with our resident bisexual disaster edgelord Vax'ildan, played by Liam O'Brien, and his equally disastrous sister, twin, half-elf Vixalia, played by Laura Dan Bailey. Next we have Keyleth, a half-elf druid, played by Marisha Ray, a socially awkward redhead with all of the awkwardness that comes with being a redhead. And Scanlan Shorthalt, a gnomish bard, heart and god slayer, played by Sam Riegel. We'll put him over there, yep, that seems good. And here we have Pike Trickfoot, a verified 3-foot tall gnome angel, played by Ashley Johnson. There she is, just drifting, almost falling off the wall, we're good. And who could forget Grog Strongjaw, also formerly known as Philip, played by Travis Willingham. He's a big old barbarian specimen of a man. We'll just put him up beside Keyleth here. And finally, Percival, Lord of repressing every emotion but vengeance, to Rollo the Third. We'll put him here beside Vex. He is played by Taliesin, Jeff. Thus completes our adventuring party. Fucking bear? No. And Trinket. Obviously Trinket's really important in this arc, so there's Trinket. And now for our key antagonists of the Briarwood arc. Starting with Lady Delilah Briarwood, a hot necromancer. We'll just put her under here. And her equally attractive vampire husband, Lord Silas Briarwood. Keep them together, because that's what they want. The gothic power couple of the century and every bisexual's worst nightmare. I'm also going to put the city of Whitestone up here because although it's not technically a character, it is an antagonistic force against the adventuring party. So now that we've established our central characters, here's a brief overview of the plot of this story. The Briarwoods, originally from the continent of Wildmount, come to Daldori, establishing themselves as a part of the ruling class of the region, covertly overthrowing the ruling De Rollo family of the city of Whitestone in a violent upheaval that leaves Percy the only survivor. To the outside world, all of the De Rollos died of an unfortunate illness that spread through Whitestone Castle, with the Briarwoods filling that power vacuum. The Briarwoods rule Whitestone and its citizens with absolute brutality, while still keeping the peace with the leaders of Daldori. When the Briarwoods are invited to a gathering with the rest of the council, Vox Machina are also present, with combat ensuing in the palace grounds after Vax is caught spying on Lord and Lady Briarwood. This is also when we find out that Silas Briarwood is a vampire when he tries to make a snack out of Vax. Snacks, if you will. After a tense battle, the Briarwoods flee, and Vox Machina are effectively banished from the palace and the council for attacking other guests. The party then head to Whitestone themselves to put an end to things and to remove the Briarwoods, whilst also clearing their names. There, they witness the true horror of what has become of Percy's home. Zombified giants, raised by Delilah Briarwood, march around the city as colossal guards, whilst other forms of undead, skeletons and wraiths, wander at night, seeking out any hint of rebellion. Civilians are starving, with the city always covered in thick cloud and many homes and businesses left to ruin. Basically, Whitestone has all the life of a graveyard, one that even Caduceus wouldn't make tea from. When Vox Machina arrive, they start up a rebellion against the Briarwoods and their allies, confront Delilah and Silas, and put a halt to their potentially apocalyptic ritual under the city. That's obviously a very condensed version of hours and hours of content, but this video isn't intended to be a beat-for-beat retelling of the story arc. Instead, I'm here to talk about why I think this arc does work so well, and why it has lingered on so many years after it played out on those Campaign 1 live streams. I say lingered, but endured is probably the better term. Firstly, let's talk about the city of Whitestone itself. It really can't be overstated how important the setting was in making this story arc feel so vivid and horrifying in the same breath. I can really only credit Matthew Mercer for that side of things. He created this haunted city in all of its glorious detail, and took real care in making sure his players and the audience felt completely immersed in this location. What Matt manages to craft is a location that feels like a character, an antagonistic force in its own right against the adventuring party. It oozes personality in every street corner. Every inch of Whitestone feels dreary, oppressive, and grim. It's a suffocating place for the players and the audience to be immersed in, which is perfect for this kind of storyline, as the Briarwoods themselves embody many of these traits, draining the very life force of Whitestone away and repurposing that energy for their own undead minions. What I find particularly staggering about this element of the story arc is that the medium all of this setting is conveyed in is in live streams, unscripted live streams. Of course, there are portions of the story and setting that Matt, as the Dungeon Master, has written down and organised, but a lot of the tense atmosphere in Whitestone as a location comes from excellent improvisational descriptions delivered to the players as they creep around the desolate city streets. The result of all of this is an incredibly realised location where it truly feels like the party could take any approach or path in dealing with the Briarwoods. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's generally frowned upon when Dungeon Masters try to railroad their players to take a specific course of action. Whitestone is the antithesis of this. Any path is open to the players, which only adds to the weight of Vox Machina's decisions. The fate of this downtrodden city and its people are truly in their hands. This is what makes for truly great D&D and role-playing games generally. Whitestone's grim and horrifying atmosphere is only further cemented by what remains one of the most unsettling visuals in the history of Critical Role, and there's been a lot of them. The Sun Tree, once a focal point of community in Whitestone, is used by the Briarwoods to send a, shall we say, fairly pointed message at Vox Machina, killing and then repurposing the bodies of civilians to create crude and macabre caricatures of the party, hanging lifelessly from the Sun Tree. What was once a place of faith and community is corrupted in the most heinous way imaginable. They even made one for Trinket, those sick fucks! It's a stark reminder to the viewers of the cruelty the Briarwoods are capable of, and a reminder to Vox Machina too that to continue on this path will result in the deaths of civilians, and that some have already been murdered simply to create this message for them. You know you've struck gold as the DM when something you've created gets this kind of reaction from your players when the penny drops.
Oh my god.
Recently hunted bear that is dangling.
No.
Wait,
what? Is that us?
It looks like us.
What?
It's us.
They killed people they thought were us. Or they killed... Or it's a message. Or it's a message to us.
Another key element of the Briarwood arc is the constant feeling of tension and threat from every moment the party spends there. One misstep could be the end of things. There are few other points in Critical Role that achieve this feeling of dread. Essentially, Whitestone as a city almost plays out as one giant enduring lair action. Wraiths and toxic fog fill the streets at night, making it difficult for the party to find a place to rest. The undead giants make movement during the day difficult too, and only a few alerted would pose a real threat to the characters. There's also the possibility of one of the citizens the party tries to ally with betraying their presence to the Briarwoods. Every choice matters in this deadly setting. I've talked at length about Whitestone as an antagonistic force, but it's probably high time we talk about the Briarwoods and all of their villainous excellence, who somehow make me feel kink-shamed every time I think about them for too long. There are a number of elements that make the Briarwoods such memorable villains. Firstly, their style. Despite all of the murdering, torture, and a side of necromancy, I can't help but admire the poise with which the Briarwoods hold themselves. On top of this, I can still empathise with Delilah's motivations, doing anything she can to bring her husband back from the dead.
Releasing this beam and watching him be disintegrated. Immediately her eyes open wide and she screams out, "No! Silas!" And you can see like her whole body shaking now at this point. The horror of seeing her partner, the love of her life, disintegrated before her. Tears immediately burst down her face, and her hands are shaking in there as she just screams out, "You can't! I broke the world for us! No!"
It makes them so compelling to watch, especially when Vox Machina pushes them to their limits and we see this genuine love for each other, a desperation to survive. They are scene stealers and make you feel on edge every time you're in their company. And just to really compound this devilish duo as great villains, the Briarwoods also directly threaten Vox Machina's position in the world. They don't have the trust of Uriel anymore, nor their positions on the Tal'Dorei Council. Until Silas and Delilah are dealt with, the party will never be able to recover the positions of trust they earned. Before I talk about the various servants of the Briarwoods, I think it's worth mentioning another memorable antagonist of this arc. The Door. That being the temple door that takes a ridiculous amount of spell slots and time to open, even though it's just a regular door. This arc featured the beginning of the now infamous The Party versus the Door.
Can I do that?
Certainly.
All right.
Throwing everything we got
Does
at
it
this
only
door.
affect living things, or does it affect...
Wait. Scanlan, are there any windows in
They
there?
said the window was broken.
Oh, there are windows. Good call. Good call.
The window. We're going to the window.
No. Let's carry this out.
No, we're going to the window. Not destroy the temple.
3 hours later, we're still trying to open the door.
It's not even locked. It's just heavy-ish.
Moving swiftly on from doors, it would be remiss of me not to talk a little about a sinister group of villains that served the Briarwoods, those that came to power after the Durolls were slaughtered. Starting with Anna Ripley. Ripley serves as a bit of a parallel to Percy, a genius in her own right who, using some of Percy's research, began her own tinkering with firearm construction. Anna very much serves her own needs and is far more concerned with her own research and self-preservation than loyalty to the Briarwoods. Sir Cerrion Stonefell was the captain of the guard for the Briarwoods and a physical brute in every way possible, instrumental in brutalising the citizens of Whitestone and a real figure of fear in the city. Professor Anders was Percy's former tutor and betrayed the de Rollos to help the Briarwoods seize the city. Anders is an excellent manipulator and is a bard by class, using his skills with language and the arcane to influence others to his own ends. There was also Jasna Graben, who, although we never see fighting during this story arc, is said to have carried around quivers, so was probably a ranger of some kind. Duke Goran Vedmire was also a servant of the Briarwoods. He was a Goliath, and likely to have been a barbarian in class. Not that he got to show it much after being led on an absolutely wild goose chase by Scanlan. The reason that I bring up this group is that these new nobles served as a sort of anti-Vox Machina, similar in their skills, but far different in their nature, a corruption of the party in the same manner that the Briarwoods corrupted Whitestone. I love that Matt had the forethought to design the new nobles group like this, especially considering how little he got to use most of them due to some smart tactics and some damn good rolls on the part of the players. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's the content with personal stakes that really sticks with players, and the Briarwood arc has that by the bucket load. A number of the characters have personal stakes in this particular story. The most obvious of the bunch is Percy. Whitestone is his home, and these are his people. It's a matter of duty for Percy to fix things for the citizens his family were charged with. There is of course also the overwhelming element of vengeance for Percy's motivations too. The Briarwoods murdered all of his family with the exception of Cassandra de Rollo, and even then, the Briarwoods still got their claws into his younger sister. Repairing the fragile relationship between himself and his sister is a dangerous and emotionally taxing road. Did I mention that Percy has also been influenced by a smoke demon that feeds on his desire for vengeance for years prior to this confrontation? It's safe to say the stakes couldn't really be higher for Percy in restoring peace to his home and finally getting his vengeance, without of course losing himself entirely to the bloodlust of revenge. Then there's Keyleth, who ends up pretty traumatised by this whole experience. Keyleth as a druid is strongly connected with nature, and it's clear that the corruption of the plants and wildlife in Whitestone deeply affects her. The corruption of the Sun Tree in particular, and Keyleth's lack of ability to restore it through her own arcane abilities seems to really shake her convictions and her confidence. Restoring Whitestone to its former glory is more than just rebuilding its people and streets to Keyleth. It's restoring the city's connection with nature too. The Briarwood arc is a real test of Keyleth's determination and skills as a druid in that regard. Although Pike doesn't have a huge role in this arc because of Ashley's other commitments at the time, there are still personal stakes for her too because of the manner in which the Briarwoods have corrupted faith and religion in the city, violently overthrowing the scholars within the different temples of the city and leaving them to rot. The Sun Tree of course also being a huge religious symbol in the city that is completely defiled by the Briarwoods. It's her duty as a cleric of the Everlight to stop this evil. For the disaster twins Vax and Vex, the abusive and terrible state of affairs for the people of Whitestone draws them both into this story. The plight of innocent civilians is very hard for the twins not to feel deeply involved with given their background. It touches a nerve for both of them as they grew up peasants with their mother, subject to the whims of those of a higher class. Vax in particular has such a strong reaction when he comes face to face with any of the new nobles, willing to end their lives without hesitation. Although neither Grog or Scanlan have as much personal involvement here, they both get moments to shine. Scanlan's one gnome stand against the Goliath Goran in particular lives rent-free in my head. Grog also ends up getting a pretty spooky sword at the end of this story arc, which has ramifications for his character going forward. Vox Machina are really pushed to their limits in this arc, struggling to find places to rest and recover, and always in danger of being discovered or betrayed. When they do eventually confront the Briarwoods, the acid trap they end up trapped in is one of the most dangerous situations the party has found themselves in up to this point. It doesn't really end there either, with the magic cipher in the underground temples the Briarwoods are trying to activate a really punishing narrative device. When Vex is taken down and needs to be revived, none of the party are able to offer any arcane aid in the form of healing due to this cipher. It's an extremely stressful moment as the clock ticks to save her, and we get this amazing but painful reaction from Vax.
Fuck that bitch! We need to get my sister out of this room. Keyleth, can we use vines? What can we use to get my sister out of this room now?
Where's the have it right now?
Pike, please help her.
So you have her up there.
Hey.
Okay, so you go for cure wounds. You pull up your holy symbol. You put your hand to her. Nothing's happening.
Pull her out of here.
Make another death saving throw.
Oh my god, I'm gonna die. You're not gonna die. You're not gonna die. We're gonna
Well,
get out.
say.
This moment also inadvertently heavily foreshadowed how determined that Vax would be to save his sister's life if it was on the line. This was a really fun video to make, but as you can imagine, it took me a hot minute to put together, gathering all of this footage, writing the script, recording the voiceover, and editing the damn video. So if you did really enjoy this, then please subscribe and leave a like, that would be really appreciated. Also make sure to check out our other content for Vox Machina. We are currently making reactions and reviews for the animated series, and some of them should be up by the time I upload this bastard. If you also want to support the channel more directly, we do have a Patreon account. Until the next time, thank you for watching.